There's a person in almost every workplace that I've ever worked at and heard about, and maybe you've worked for one of these people, or maybe you are one of these people who's absolutely exceptional at what they do. And then one day, for a whole bunch of reasons, they get promoted, right? They started their own thing, or they decided that nobody else could do it as well as them. So why would they let anyone else try? And then slowly and quietly, or maybe loudly, I don't know, and sometimes catastrophically, everything just falls apart. And to me, that is Walter White, the exceptionally brilliant individual contributor who promoted himself to manager / small business owner and then failed because he didn't have any leadership skills. And that's the story of most exceptional individual contributors who get promoted, right? It's just because they're really good at their current job, but then they fail because they're brilliant and they don't know how to lead humans effectively. And if you're new here, I'm Jen. I help small business owners lead other humans like a human. And this video is part of my Dark Leadership series where I use fictional characters as real leadership case studies. And Breaking Bad is one of the best shows ever made, definitely in my top 5 favorites, so I'm not here to argue that. But fiction gives us something real life can't, which is distance. And distance is sometimes the only way that we can actually see something clearly. So, if you are coming here to argue about whether Vince Gilligan wrote a good show, he did. We agree. Go in peace. Media literacy is not dead over here. But if you want to understand why someone who is exceptional at their craft can still burn everything that they build to the ground, then stick with me. Let's talk about the Walter White before Heisenberg, right? Before the Blue Meth, the Empire, and before...
I am the danger. I am the one who knocks.
Walt was a very overqualified high school chemistry teacher, obviously. I mean, the man co-founded a company called Gray Matter that eventually became worth over, I think it was $2 billion. I think he was a legit genius. So, to me, the chemistry was never the problem. The problem was that Walt spent decades feeling like he'd been cheated out of the recognition that he deserved. He was undervalued, overworked, and passed over. And when he finally got the chance to build something of his own, he had all of the exceptional individual contributor skills in the world and absolutely none of the leadership ones. 0. So, this story isn't actually a story about a drug lord. This is a story about a guy who was really, really good at his job and had absolutely 0 business being in charge of anyone. And like many of you, I've watched this play out in real life. Not in meth labs, obviously. Maybe some of you, but not me. But definitely in corporate offices for me. Small businesses as well. Startups, family companies, right? The brilliant and talented employee who gets promoted or promotes themselves into a leadership role and then wonders why everything keeps catching fire. So Walt's thesis, for our purposes today, is this. Being the best at the work does not make you qualified to lead the people doing the work. And when gone unexamined, the gap between those two things costs everyone around you something that they can't get back. Nobody promoted Walt or groomed him for the meth drug lord thing. He just decided that he was going to build something and assumed that because he understood chemistry better than anyone alive, the people part would just sort of figure itself out. And this is one of the most common and most devastating things that I see in small business. Someone is exceptional at their craft, right? Like coding, cooking, designing, teaching, treating patients, writing copy, building furniture, whatever it may be. And they decide to go out on their own. Or they get promoted because their numbers were the best on the team. And then suddenly they're managing people, right? Making hiring decisions, handling conflict, giving feedback. And nobody ever asked whether they were ready for any of that. And this is literally the entire reason that my channel exists. I think we are about to enter a period of time where many people are going to start their own businesses because they were forced out, laid off, burned out, right? Pick any reason you want and insert it here. The world is absolutely wild right now. So anyway, Walt's version of this is extreme, obviously, but the pattern is everywhere. So think about what Walt brings to his business, right? Unmatched product quality, strategic thinking, adaptability, problem solving under pressure, right? Write those on a resume and I'd bet good money that you'd hire him tomorrow because I would. Now think about what he's missing. The ability to hear feedback without his ego collapsing, to share credit, to let someone else be right, and to develop the people around him rather than just extracting their usefulness from them. He doesn't start a business, right? He starts a one-man operation that happens to require other people, and then he treats those people accordingly. And so the first thing that a real leader has to accept is that the moment you're responsible for other humans, your output is no longer the product. Your output is the people. And Walt never learned or accepted that. If you want to understand Walt as a leader, you really don't need to look any further than his relationship with Jesse. For all intents and purposes, Jesse Pinkman is Walt's employee. His partner technically, but we all know what that power dynamic actually is. And the way that Walt treats Jesse is a masterclass in how a brilliant individual contributor who never learned to lead treats the people who work for them. Let me walk you through it using something that I actually teach. It's called the SBI framework. And it's mostly for giving feedback, but it applies to this too, right? Situation, behavior, impact. What happened, what Walt did, and what it actually cost. So, the situation. Jesse has an idea. Jesse sees a problem. Jesse pushes back. And then the behavior. Walt dismisses it, talks over it, or manipulates the situation to get the outcome he wanted anyway, while making Jesse feel like he's been heard. And the impact, Jesse never fully trusts Walt, never fully grows up. And ultimately, the entire operation collapses in ways that a trusted, developed partner might have helped prevent. And here's the thing. Walt needs Jesse. Jesse is his access point to the street, his distribution, his protection in a world Walt doesn't know how to navigate. Jesse has skills Walt very obviously doesn't have, and Walt cannot once just say that. It's like he's completely incapable of saying, you're good at something that I'm not, because that would require Walt to not be the smartest person in the room. And Walt's entire identity is built on being the smartest person in the room. I see this with people all the time, right? They hire someone because they need the help. And then they micromanage every single thing that person does because letting someone else be good at something feels like a threat. I've been there. And you know what happens when you run a team like that? The good ones leave, and the ones who stay either get smaller or they start protecting themselves from you. And you don't even see it coming. Jesse didn't start as Walt's enemy. Walt made Jesse his enemy through years of manipulation, control, and the refusal to ever treat him as a full human being with his own value. And that's a leadership failure. Dressed up in very dramatic clothes, but a leadership failure nonetheless. So, if any of this is feeling uncomfortably familiar, right? If you're recognizing some Walt in yourself or in someone that you've worked for, I want you to know that's actually a really good sign, because the fact that you can see it means that you can do something about it. I have a full workbook called Scripts for Hard Conversations, and it's built around that SBI framework that I just walked you through. And it's got scripts for a bunch of different leadership situations that most leaders are either avoiding or handling very badly. There's also some other tools that go along with that if that's something you're interested in. Investment in you is anywhere from $17 to $67, and the link is in the description. So anyway, at some point in the series, Walt goes from a flawed leader to a pretty dangerous one. He stops trying to earn trust and starts trying to manufacture it. He poisons a child to manipulate Jesse's emotions. He lets Jane die to keep Jesse dependent on him. He threatens, he lies, he plants evidence and pulls strings, all in the name of keeping his operation together and keeping himself at the top of it. Now, most small business owners are not poisoning children, obviously. Let's be clear about that. But the impulse underneath those behaviors, like the need to control outcomes by controlling people rather than by being trustworthy, is an impulse that shows up in workplaces all over the world every single day. It shows up as the boss who withholds information to keep people dependent on them. The leader who takes credit for the team's work so they can stay necessary, right? The manager who subtly undermines anyone who starts to shine a little too bright, because if that person looks too good, then what does that say about me? Walt's team stays because they're afraid of what happens if they leave. It's absolutely not because they trust him. And there is a name for that in leadership research. It's actually the opposite of that, and it's called psychological safety, which is also something that I talk about a lot here. And psychological safety is the belief that you can speak up, push back, make a mistake, and not be punished for it. Walt's operation has negative psychological safety, right? People don't just fear punishment, they actually fear Walt himself. And here's the business cost of that. When your team is operating from fear, they're not bringing you their best thinking. They're bringing you what they think you want to hear, right? Hiding problems until they become crises. Saying yes when they mean no. And your whole operation is running on incomplete information. Walt called it an empire, but I would call it a time bomb. And here's the part that gets me every time. Walt was correctable. Early on, there were multiple people around him. Mike, Gus, even Jesse, who saw things more clearly than he did. They had experience that he lacked, and they were trying, in their own ways, to give him information that would have helped him. And Walt couldn't hear it. He wouldn't hear it. Every piece of feedback became an attack on his identity. He had a big ego, and that ego was eventually named Heisenberg. Every suggestion felt like someone saying, "You're not as smart as you think you are." And every moment of someone else being right was a moment that Walt absolutely couldn't tolerate. Mike says it so directly, and it's one of the greatest lines in the show.
Good thing, you stupid son of a bitch. It was perfect. But no, you just had to blow it up. You and your pride and your ego. You just had to be the man. If you'd done your job, known your place, we'd all be fine right now.
That's someone telling their boss with everything they have that your ego is going to destroy this. And Walt hears it as an insult instead of a warning. The bosses that I think are the most dangerous are the ones who are hurt and who never figured out that their value as a human being is not the same thing as how good they are at their job. And unfortunately, I think that's a good number of people who are currently in leadership positions. Because those people will blow up everything around them just to stay right. You have to do your healing, folks. You'll never be perfect, but you can be better. That's why I'm so glad that you're here. But Walt couldn't do that. And I don't think it's because he was evil. I think it's because he spent so many years being undervalued that his self-worth became completely fused with his competence. And I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that. I know I can. You couldn't question Walt's decisions without questioning his worth as a human being. And that's a trauma response, and that is unfortunately very common. Now, I want to be careful here because I don't want to wrap Walt up in this neat little bow, right? The show doesn't do that, and neither will I. But I do want to name what's underneath the Heisenberg story because I think it matters for anyone who's building something. And that is that Walt needed to be seen. He needed to matter, and he needed his work to mean something beyond the paycheck and the classroom and the second job at the car wash. That is a deeply human need. And it got completely corrupted by the fact that he never dealt with it honestly. He just found an arena where he could finally win. So, if you're building something, a business, a team, a department, your people are not there to validate you and make you feel like the smartest person in the room or to stay quiet when they have a better idea. You shouldn't want them to be if you are truly committed to growth. They are there to do the work, and your job is to create the conditions where they can not only do that work, but do it well. Unfortunately, Walt never learned that, and every person who touched his life paid a significant price for it. And that's why Breaking Bad is such a tragedy. And that tragedy is also part of why it's so brilliant, right? It's the story of what could have been if Walt had any of the self-awareness, humility, or leadership skills to match his intellect. Gus Fring, who I've done a full video on, and who's honestly one of the best fictional examples of servant leadership that I've ever seen, built the exact same operation with the same product. And he built it sustainably for many years, precisely because he understood that his job was to lead the people, not just produce the thing. And so the difference between Walt and Gus was that Gus actually cared about what his people needed. And I don't think the thought of doing that ever even crossed Walt's mind. So, if today's video made you think about your own leadership or about a leader that you've worked for, I want you to know there are tools for this, and they are at the link in my bio or in the description. I purposely built them for small business owners who want to lead better, communicate clearer, and stop letting the hard stuff pile up until it explodes. You're busy. You don't need to be stressing about any of that. And if you want to support the channel without buying anything, you can always buy me a coffee at that same link. I am like Lorelai Gilmore. Coffee is how I survive. And I will see you in the next one.